All right, welcome everybody. My name is Brian Littleton with Race Logic Chassis School. I've done chassis schools about 30 years. This year I was a good friend of mine that I watch race a lot, and most of you in the room probably heard of him or know him, Dallin Murdy. Well, I happened to be in Oklahoma when he had a horrible crash. I was standing there, and to witness that, as a dad, seeing a young kid, I really didn't think he was going to be alive when I walked over there. Well, he made it through it. Well, it just kind of inspired me. I'm like, you know what? Everybody keyboard warriors got on the computer and wanted to talk about safety. The cage should have done this and this equipment should have done that. Well, nobody's ever done anything. Nobody's ever got together and let's try to find some solutions. So I told myself, and I called Kate and I said, hey, I want to do something. And so I knew she's having a car show, and it just all worked out. She was gracious enough to let us use the room to be able to do this. And I borrowed, begged, pleaded everybody I knew in my racing family to come and try to, let's get information out. It doesn't have to be I got the best product or whatever. I mean, there's people in the room here that I know has got great parts and seats and all that. But, let's talk about how to mount them, what to do, the safety aspect of it. So like I said, I do appreciate everybody coming. It means a lot to me personally. And hopefully we can get this out to thousands of racers. Like I told Chad when he came, if we can just save one guy's life or one guy from getting burnt or one guy from getting hurt or a concussion, then it was worth it to me. And so that's what we're going to try to do. It's nothing formal. Like I said, if you got a question, you have to talk into one of the microphones, okay? Ask away. Not everybody's going to be right, or you may have a different thought than the next guy, but let's talk about it. I kind of got us a slideshow here we'll go over, and then there'll be some other stuff. People's got slideshows, so we'll kind of start out. Ben Baker's helped me for years in my chassis schools. He's going to kind of headline it because I told him I wasn't smart enough, but I knew he could, so he'll kind of headline it and get people to come up and talk. And, any of you guys, like I know Chris races a lot, so, if you got anything you want to add to any of the sections, be sure and add it, that we can try to help, okay? Ben, we'll get started with you.
All right. So like Brian said, this is really going to be pretty informal. I'm by no means any expert on safety. I've been in motorsports since the mid '90s. I have seen some pretty bad accidents. I've seen a lot of cars at the tracks, and you wonder, how does that car even get on the racetrack? Or how does that driver even feel comfortable getting in that car? So I think a lot of the things that we'll talk about in here, hopefully will get it out to the masses to have people kind of sit back and look at their cars and think, okay, what do I really need to do in the case of emergency? How do I need to get out of the car? Practice getting in and out of the car. The guy I used to work with in a dirt late model, we actually did that. I mean, he was by no means a big guy, but that was one thing that he was always conscious of is, okay, how do I get out of a race car if I'm upside down? We actually had some old cars where we mounted seats in them and turned them over with a fork truck, try to practice getting in and out of the car. He had a young son, started racing go-karts and stuff like that when he was 5, had him in a stock car when he was 10 years old, like a full-blown Camaro car. We had him in a full-blown late model at 12 years old. Same deal with him. We had at that time, there wasn't a lot of safety things that were available. Like the fire bottles were really rare to see in a car at that time. This was in 2000, 2001, 2002. So a lot of the fire bottle technology that we have today wasn't there. A lot of the seats that we have today weren't there by no means. So safety has definitely came a long ways, but it still needs a lot of help. But Brian's going to go through some slides here. I know we don't have a lot of fuel cell people in here, so please, if anybody has anything to interject towards it. I am not a big fuel cell person. I don't know just a ton about them. I just know things that I ran into from a mounting standpoint or what I see at the racetracks. So the fuel safe Jazz in this case, they're Superior. There's several different fuel cells out there, very good companies. They've all learned things over the years to make these fuel cells safer. Something that I see at a racetrack a lot, and this is probably not for many people in here, but for the people out there at the racetrack. What was it, Matt? Probably in Tampa days when fuel safe got really, that was probably mid '90s, late '90s. One of the things that was like a big thing then was the fact that they had that flapper valve over the fill port of the fuel cells. Today that's a pretty standard thing to have or to see. Yet today I will see a lot of racers take that spring, take it plumb out of there, take and bend it to where it's easier to get the fuel cell funnel in, to put fuel in it, things like that. Those things were put in place to help, help safety, help in a rollover situation. So make sure that thing's in there, make sure it's, we're doing what it's supposed to be doing. If you have a question of whether or not it's doing what it's doing, fill the thing full of water and turn it upside down. Make sure it's not leaking out. Same thing with the vents. Making sure that you have fuel lines or the vent line routed to where it can't siphon it out. I have seen those things siphon out on racetracks. I've seen them back in the day where we ran a lot of alcohol. You fill the fuel cell plumb full for a 50 lapper and weave the car, and it would actually siphon the fuel out on the racetrack while you was racing. So definitely check those things. Make sure that all those check balls, everything is working the way it's supposed to be working there.
Hey Ben, I got something to add that I learned a few years ago, believe it or not, and I don't race, but the big fuel cap with a lid, them were actually designed. They were for Bell helicopters. That's how they fueled helicopters.
Yeah.
Most people didn't know that, but the old metal lids with a D-ring or whatever on it, that's the one that the kid got burned up several years ago down in Texas, and I knew his father-in-law. It was a horrible story, but he forgot to put the cap back on, and the flapper in there wore out, and when he flipped over, all the fuel ran out on the ground. But that big D-ring, because his father-in-law had studied this, and that big D-ring cap I think it may even be called Bell, but it was designed for Bell helicopters. That's how they fueled helicopters. Right. So terrible design, and I don't know that there's any of them left out there in the world, but man.
There's quite a few of them.
All
of them cars that were built in the 90s, all of them cars, there's still a lot of them out there racing that
if that flapper is not working.
They never even came with a flapper. The flapper didn't come out until the fuel safe and the ATLs came out with that smaller intake port. That's where the flapper came out.
That's,
yeah.
Do what? Still sell them?
Yep.
Man, I'm telling
They're
you.
cheap.
They're cheap. But that's what, you got that big a hole and you're upside down and it's running down underneath you, bad things can happen. Yep. So you need to make sure the safety's there.
The other thing I see with fuel cells a lot, just working around cars at the track, is just how these things are mounted. You don't see it too bad in like a late model or dirt modified. More of them I'll call like a store-bought frame, but your hobby stocks, your pure stocks, some of the more home-built cars, that fuel cell, if it's a 20-gallon fuel cell, there's 140 or 160 pounds, 140 pounds of weight swinging in there. That's a lot of weight if you think about it. And I've seen them mounted with 5/16 bolts, and stood up on a spacer this tall. Well, you get in any kind of little accident, that thing's not going to stay. So just pay attention to a lot of those different things. A lot of it's pretty much common sense, but people just don't sit back and look at that when they're looking at the car. Yeah.
I wanted to bring up on your vent line on the fuel cell, excellent point. You can loop it, or the other thing being make sure that the line is below the fuel cell and properly secured. Oftentimes I've seen the vent line just laying on top of the fuel cell. So if your tip over valve isn't working as it should and you get flipped, all of a sudden that fuel's now all rushing out of the vent hole.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to take them basically straight out of the vent, and even if I can make a loop up and then all the way down, but make it where the filter is below the fuel cell. That seems to always work good. Also, if you've run it that direction too, when you wash the car, you don't have to worry about getting water up in that line or water trapped in there. So there's a lot of benefits to doing that vent line like that. Any other questions on cells or statements or?
Then I don't need a mic probably, but just.
No, well, we got to because we got to have it recorded.
Just high grade bolts.
Yeah, high grade bolts. Don't go whatever you can get at Harbor Freight or whatever and get in there. Get some grade 8 bolts. I don't know exactly what they're recommending as far as bolt sizes, but for me, I would think a 1/2 inch diameter would be the smallest that I would want in it, really. So.
As well as the quality, as you mentioned, those are both excellent. Do not buy the cheap eBay, Amazon aluminum fuel cells. They are very cheap. They do not work very well. You're looking for something with an internal bladder, plastic bladder, metal case, something along those lines. The cheap aluminum cells that you can find online for like $100, they do not have anything internal. It's just aluminum box that's been welded together. So with the bouncing around, the welds start ripping, and now your car is full of fuel. So do not buy those.
Yeah. Yeah, I think most of the, more name brand heard of fuel cells in our industry, I mean, they're good cells. It's just a matter of how you're using them. Anything else on that? Fuel lines, carburetor, again, Matt, you might even interject on some of this, but, the fuel lines, basically routing those things to where you can keep them away from heat. Think about if something gets on fire, is that fuel line the first thing that's going to catch on fire? If you chuck a rods out of a motor or something like that, have a big fireball, is the fuel line the first thing that's going to hit? If you get in a wreck, thinking about, most cars in our world, if we're looking at like a right front impact, if the frame moves, does it get a fuel line pinched or cut? So just think, try to think outside the box. Hopefully you never have to be in that situation, but, just think of things that can happen that's out of the ordinary, and make sure those fuel lines aren't in the way of that. So I don't know if you got anything else. Or
Also checking, like a lot of people use push lock fittings on that, just a inexpensive way to get the car done, but, checking those fittings if that's what you do use,
Yeah.
making sure that, those do tend to wear, come loose, and you fray the hose or whatever, they can leak under pressure, so just keeping a good check on those.
Yeah. Yeah, as far as lines like that, I've never been a huge push lock fan unless it's a suction line. If it's a pressure line, even a line that's got 15, 20 pounds of pressure on it, I want to have a line that's really made for pressures. I know a lot of people use push locks and they have no issues with them. Like you said, it's a bit of a maintenance deal, but if you can, getting lines made today is no big deal really. In the grand scheme of things, it's not the most expensive part of the car by no means, but if it's going to be under pressure, I try to stay away from the push lock. Carburetors, there's been some great safety things put in place for carburetors over the years between rollover valves. A lot of the, what am I thinking? Super Bowl stuff. A lot of that stuff has came from a performance aspect, but at the same time, a lot of those carburetor builders have done a great job of thinking about safety compared to what it was 20 years ago. So definitely, look at carburetors that have some of that technology with them. As hey, if I'm upside down, is this thing going to drain the bowls out? Is it, what all is going to happen with this thing in a wreck? So, some things you can do on the older style older style carburetors is looping a hose between the breather vents, things like that, just to capture that fuel if you get upside down. You got something?
Hey, just the other thing on the carburetor is we've seen a lot in the last couple of years. At least for me, it's a lot because one is a lot, but significantly more than that. But where that carburetor arm comes back and hits that throttle stop and it's a bolt there, anytime I see that, I'm recommending to weld a washer on that to make the outside diameter of that smooth, because those quick disconnect throttle arms will get hooked on the side of that bolt and keep that throttle wide open.
Yeah.
And I've personally seen 4 incidents where that's happened, and it's went wide open and they've destroyed cars, and luckily they've walked away. But literally take 5 minutes just to make sure this thing's lined up right and it has hitting a flat surface, and make the surface larger if you need to.
Yeah, definitely throttle stops are something, very important. A lot of people do overlook that. I like the throttle stop like you're talking about there. I also like the one that you can put, in the driver's compartment to where the throttle pedal can't over travel as well. One thing that actually I have ran into from a maintenance standpoint, I have seen the butterflies come loose on cross shafts. I have seen base plates come loose on the Venturas. So, that's something weekly or monthly I would take apart, make sure none of that stuff's loose, moving around, because, you might even lose a screw and drop it down through an engine, and that's really bad. But if you get one of those cross shafts that comes loose, or the butterfly comes loose and hangs that thing wide open, that's going to be even worse. So definitely from a maintenance standpoint, you can look at those things on a carburetor. I don't know if anybody's ever had that happen or not, but yeah.